Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma is out today. Joining us on the program, returning, Ryan Grimm, D.C. Bureau Chief at the Intercept, co-host of Counterpoints, and of course, also one of the best dressed people on this broadcast today.
There you go. What do you think of the shirt?
These
are bicycles. Good. Can you see them?
No. I can't.
Well,
really
they're
see
bicycles.
They're too tiny. Well, that's all right. Well, then I would say that there's still an opening for me. All right, let's talk about this. I mean, over the past couple of days, there's, I think, there's been slowly a sense that this was happening. But what's your assessment? Let's start with, why Bowman lost. And obviously, we start with the $15 to $20 million that came in from outside expenditure, but there's other reasons too.
Yes, and I think it really frustrates some Bowman opponents that AIPAC spent so much money that they just can't claim a clean victory now. Because there's an argument to be made, and you know this district very well, that if AIPAC had just completely stayed out of the race, that there's still a chance that Latimer beats Bowman. In fact, Latimer might even be the favorite going into that race, particularly kind of post-fire alarm Bowman. Latimer's a well-known guy in the area. It's not a flaming left-wing district, but dropping $17 million in there changes the equation. It just does. And so that you can't disentangle that from what it was. I think, there's a couple of interesting things here. One is that Bowman really helped create AIPAC's super PAC. If you remember, in 2020, when he beat Eliot Engel, DMFI, Democratic Majority for Israel, which was kind of a proto-AIPAC super PAC, it was aligned with AIPAC. A lot of AIPAC donors, a lot of AIPAC folks were involved with it. But AIPAC itself did not have a super PAC. That was a threshold that they had not decided to cross yet. The MFI spent $2 million plus trying to beat Jamaal Bowman, and Bowman knocked off Engel anyway. And it was around that moment where AIPAC said, you know what, I think we might need to get into this game ourselves. We can't just leave this to DMFI. And then they came through with their super PAC spending more than any single entity has spent in a congressional race ever. But I think it was, I'm curious for your take on this. Bowman's trip hosted by J Street in 2021 to visit the West Bank, to visit Israel and the West Bank. It seems like that changed him as a person, and changed his understanding of Israel-Palestine politics. Steny Hoyer leads these bipartisan trips every 2 years that are sponsored by AIPAC. And those people get a propaganda trip, and they come back fortified in their support for Israel. Bowman came back, and within a year of that, had even lost J Street's support because he was so appalled by the conditions on the ground that he saw. And for people who kind of see that up close, that's a very common experience. It's one thing to be told it's apartheid. It's another thing to see it with your own eyes.
I've had multiple conversations, not on camera, with people who were, I went over there and I was thinking that I was going to have a more nuanced take on what's going on. And I was like, whoa, this is really bad. And yes, I believe that it did, I don't know if radicalize is necessarily the right word, but it certainly honed that. And the other thing that I think people forget too is that district, this is the third iteration of that district. And it is only because in 2022, it was different than it was in 2020. And in 2024, it was different than it was in 2022. And each time it got a little bit more wealthy, wealthy suburbs, people who don't want to maybe have the Trump tax cuts rolled back. I think the Jewish population, and again, probably the more conservative Jewish population grew as well in that instance. And so I think that contributed to this as much as anything, in terms of just like, you got a different demographic that's going on there, and you combine that with that money. I mean, I also think that like Bowman made a strategic decision to run against AIPAC, and this is also, the environment that we're in because of what Israel's doing in Gaza. But Bowman made it seemed to make a very conscious decision to run against the AIPAC money, as opposed to Latimer. And Latimer, right. I think, like, he definitely has obviously deep connections, particularly in Westchester. But the stuff, there was a lot of stuff that he was saying that even for like a normie Dem, like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Like, I think the thing that people in Westchester liked about Latimer was, we can vote for him and save our Trump tax cuts without it being about that. And Bowman never made them face that decision in some ways, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it also shows how much the politics of race have changed since 2020. In 2020, Elliot Engel went to a George Floyd rally, and famously had one of the greatest gaffes of all time, where he's caught on a hot mic, trying to speak, and the organizers are like, "There's too many electeds here. We can't have everybody speak. We'll be here all day. It's hot." He's like, "Look, I wouldn't even be here if I didn't have a primary. Just let me speak." And that was caught on New York One, and it played into, gaffes really hit you when it plays into an existing weakness. And he was already in trouble because he'd been caught lying about being in the district and actually living in Maryland. And it showed, this is an out of touch guy who's been in office for like 40 years or something. And it killed him. Latimer had made so many, what you would call racially tone deaf comments at best throughout this race. And they were just shrugged off by Westchester voters. Yeah. Like, they're like, this is not 2020 anymore. We did that. We're like, it really felt like it was like a page had been turned on that question. Like, white liberals a few years ago would not have tolerated the kinds of stuff that he's been saying.
But I mean, that's hard to. I'd be curious, like, if there was a way, and there's not. But I'd be curious as to how many people heard him say that. You know what I mean? Like, this is where the money made a difference. It's just like there was no space for any type of narrative that that Bowman could have pushed. Like, I don't know how many of the Westchester people knew about the tax cuts. I don't know that anybody knew about the tax cuts. I don't know. Did they know that Latimer was, driving around in a staff car because when he got into an accident, because his car was unregistered because he had so many parking tickets, that he'd been driving around on a suspended license, that he hired his girlfriend to be a county employee,
county job.
I mean, there was a lot of stuff there, and I don't know, A, how much the Bowman campaign pushed that, or B, if they made a calculated decision like, we can't change the narrative of this race. We have to sort of play into the fact that the money, we can't fight that money in that way.
It felt like YOLO. It felt like Bowman knew he was going to lose and wanted to go down fighting a principled fight. Like, that's what it felt like towards the end. And like, I think you're right. Strategically, when, say, like Summer Lee or Cori Bush are going after their opponents for taking AIPAC money, or Sushila Jayapal out in Portland, like, they don't actually hit AIPAC directly. What they do is they say, this is Republican money, because it is. Like, 90% of it's Republican money. This is Republican billionaire money coming in to mess with the Democratic primary. Because that's what polling shows, like that moves the needle with Democratic voters. There was some polling done in the Portland, Oregon race by one of the campaigns that found that, like, most voters hadn't even heard of AIPAC. So, like, you running against AIPAC, now that might not be the case for a lot of primary voters in Westchester, but in general, saying he has the support of Trump donors is a very damning hit. Saying that they have the support of AIPAC, even among people who support a ceasefire and would call themselves pro-Palestine, it's like they're not motivated necessarily to vote on those on that question.
The problem that Bowman had, though, in that situation of saying like he's being supported by Trump money, is that Hillary Clinton and Mondaire Jones come in and basically, neutralize that critique. And so
like,
he's
vote for Latimer,
vote for Latimer, and it's like, well, wait a second, is he a Trump? Is he a Trump stalking horse, or is he a Clinton Democrat? And I would
how do you think he would have done? Lauren Boebert, was facing a similar situation where she barely got reelected last time and was probably going to lose in her race. She switched districts. What do you think would have happened if Bowman tried to run against Richie Torres?
I mean, that at least would have been, I think that would have been an interesting race because
still would have gotten 20 million spent against him, but
he still would have gotten 20 million spent against him, but it also would have like really filtered into Torres's like the narrative that he was bought and paid for. I mean, it's, Latimer did not make his bones or become a national figure talking about Israel and Gaza.
Right.
And so it was much harder to tie that in. It became more about they're coming after me as opposed to like putting up their candidate.
Right. So
it would have been an interesting dynamic, I think, had he done that. I mean, of course,
maybe in 2 years.
Maybe in 2 years. So let's talk about. I was also struck. I just want to say this too. I'm just like looking at like the Bob Good race, and the Freedom Caucus is about to boot out one of the guys in the Freedom Caucus for endorsing a challenger to Bob Good. And this is after Bob Good looks like he's losing, right? And the way that the Democratic Party has sort of like said, well, we're a little bit more tepid on the idea of challenging incumbents, right? Like Gottheimer should be censured. He should be censured by the caucus.
For hypocrisy.
For hypocrisy and, for not supporting an incumbent, whatnot. And he won't be, of course. I mean, and Latimer's going to be basically is Gottheimer across the Hudson, essentially. I mean, he's going to be a Joe Manchin figure, I think, within the Democratic caucus, to the extent that happens in Congress. But what happens now in terms of Cori Bush? Like everybody's trying to spin this as if it was about Israel. And it wasn't. Latimer had no Israel ads, as far as I could tell. Yeah. Maybe there are, cohorts in Westchester who were rallying around Israel on some level, but certainly, like at 20,000 feet, it wasn't about Israel. What's going to happen with Cori Bush? Like, does this mean that she's going to see even more money than she would have, or is it?
Yeah,
and what is she going to take from this?
I mean, there's only so much money you can spend in St. Louis on the TV market there, and I think they will figure out how much that is, and they'll spend it because I think they'd love to take out 2, if not 3. I think there's still some elements who think that Ilhan Omar is vulnerable as well. She barely held on last time, but was caught by surprise. She's not caught by surprise this time. So we'll see. But yeah, I think Cori Bush is going to see just an absolute avalanche of funding. And, she's got things that, like the way that, United Democracy Project, AIPAC, Super PAC runs these is they poll in the district to see, I mean, this is normal politics. Like they poll in the district to see what's going to land the hardest. And then they just relentlessly run ads on that question. Like with Jayapal out in Portland, it was, about Multnomah County business. Like it was not Israel-Palestine. In St. Louis, it's not going to be about Israel-Palestine. They're going to pick on Probably if I were going to guess, they're going to go after Cori Bush for she hired her boyfriend or husband for some security work on her campaign, and they'll do a 30-second ad accusing her of corruption or whatever.
Who was incidentally a security guy. I mean, it wasn't like he was
right, but
it wasn't like he was a plumber
right,
and he got hired to provide security. He that's what he did.
Right, but you play the right kind of music,
yeah,
and with the right narrator.
Right.
By the end of it, you're like, wow, she should be in prison.
Right.
But then you're also like, oh wait, that's a 30-second political attack ad. So they don't work as well as people think, because people are smart and they know that all of these ads are filled with lies. But if you see them constantly, it does damage. They were able to knock 30 points off Nina Turner's polling. They were able to knock something like 25 points, 30 points off of Summer Lee back in 20 not this cycle, but last cycle when she was running, in just a couple of weeks with a couple $1 million in unchecked ads. So it's going to be tough, and she's got a serious opponent. How much has the I don't want to say the defunding, but there's a lot less money in Justice Democrats. There's the Sanders movement has fractured in many ways, not the least of which because of Israel's assault on Gaza. How much is that involved here? Is there's no cavalry cavalry? I can't. Cavalry. How do you say that? Yes, that's a good point, and that gives me a chance to flog my book that I've got back here on the squad. The Summer Lee's race is a really good example. So she was up 25 or 30 points. AIPAC comes in with millions of dollars of attack ads, darkening her skin, saying she's not a good enough Democrat. And without a counter to that, she went from the far and away front runner to neck and neck in the final couple of weeks. But then she was able to get up on air because she had raised a decent enough money and just showed a picture of her on stage with Joe Biden. And she's like, look, I'm a Democrat. Joe Biden thinks I'm a Democrat. And then Justice Democrats J Street, which is very important because J Street was involved at the time. Now they've kind of broken with that coalition. Working Families Party, Indivisible, they put together $1 million or $2 million and were able to get back on the air to counter the AIPAC ads and say, no, Summer Lee's good. And so then her plummet basically stabilized. But if not for that couple $1 million that came from the outside at the end, Summer Lee probably loses. She only won, I think, by triple digits, less than 1,000 votes. And you saw Nina Turner didn't really have that last minute push. And then it ended up losing by a few thousand votes in her race after that avalanche. So I think you're right that there certainly aren't the resources out there. And the Portland race is a good example. That's just a kind of random open seat to replace Earl Blumenauer. And without even disclosing the money until after the race, right, they dropped more than $5 million in that race. Just quietly, $5 million just to wipe out Pramila Jayapal's sister, just because it's her sister. And there was no WFP, Justice Democrats, Indivisible, J Street, kind of couple $1 million ad buy to come in and push back against that. It was just kind of uncontested for the most part.
Have you heard, I imagine Cori Bush's team sees what's happening with Bowman, a couple of months ago and starts to prepare for this. And they start, I don't know how much communication they can have with some of those outside groups, but are there outside groups that are starting to that have been gearing up for this and saying okay, Bowman, we may not be able to go in and do anything, but Cori Bush is going to be the firewall?
Yeah, I think they are. The Bush race is winnable in a way that it was going to be much harder to win Bowman. So I think you're right that these Justice Democrats and a handful of WFP and allies are going to put everything that they possibly can marshal into defending her. that's going to be nowhere near what AIPAC can marshal. Now, it should be noted, by the way, Bernie Sanders is sitting on, I think, people can go to Open Secrets and check, about $9 million cash in hand. Like, that's a lot of money. Now, Rashida Tlaib, I think, gave $500,000 to the Defend Bowman effort. She's got a lot more than that, and she doesn't have an opponent, so I have no doubt she's going to come in and support Bush. AOC could as well. She's got fundraising capacity. So with the combination of the existing squad members and the outside groups, if they worked together, they could bring enough money that they're playing at par. Like, they'll still get, they'll still get outspent, but they'd at least be like, have enough to be in the ball game, and that every voter would have
at least heard one time, have heard like some pushback. I mean, yeah. The Bowman race feels like it was like 5-1, 6-1.
Like that,
maybe more. I have a feeling like we're gonna find out in
this is mailers and
6 weeks. It's gonna be like it was closer to like 12-1.
And they had the money to do wild things, like one organization spent like at least $1 million or maybe more registering a couple thousand Republicans and independents.
Yes, and registering, and from I think like some of the more orthodox communities, and those are guaranteed votes. I mean, once you start getting into some of like these real sort of any type of fundamentalist community, it doesn't take much to get everybody on buses and be like, you're voting now. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's literally how it works. Or, we'll see you at here's your ballot, send it in, or give it back. I mean, this is not, that's the beauty of like those type of fundamentalist worlds. It's like, if you need something done, you just tell them and they'll do it.
They're going to do it. Yes.
Yeah, I read about that. That to me is, I think I saw that. I read that about that effort, I don't know, about 3 or 4 or 5 days ago. And when I saw the early voting numbers, that's what it made me think of. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no way you're getting those type of early voting numbers without somebody sitting there going, is someone paid to be there going, you got to fill out that vote now.
And that's what you can do when you've bought up all the airtime and you still have money left. When you're sitting around and your problem is, we have more money than we know what to do with, like, how can we spend money? And somebody's like, well, why don't we register a bunch of people and get them to
And we should also say that the reason why that is sequenced that way is because the person making that decision gets, what is it now, 10, 15, 20% VIG on what they spend on media, right? I mean, that's the way it works. Right. I don't know if people, we used to talk about this a lot more, but in terms of the at least the Democratic consultant class, when they go buy, it's like a general contractor. Like the general contractor will I'm going to take 10% on materials and 20% on the subs. And so if you get your, you get your new roof and your plumbing and your HVAC through your general contractor, there's a 20% markup by the time it gets to you. It's the same thing with media buys. That doesn't happen with organizing on the ground. You don't get a markup on that. You just get like some 3% fee or something. Mm-hmm. And so you don't get to that until you've completely, essentially, like drained any opportunity to do the media buys.
Yeah, the media buy cartel is incredible, and it's an alliance between the networks, the people that receive the money for the ads, and the people that buy them, and they really have the campaigns by the short and curlies. They're like, look, you want to get your ad up in 2 days, like, I know how to do that, and they're not going to take your call. Like, they're only doing it through me. And they're only doing it through these buyers because the buyers make it worth their while to keep that cartel in place. It's really incredible. There must be so many boats in the Chesapeake Bay that are floating there thanks to this 15% cut that they just take right off the top.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder why we have this money and politics problem, and the reason is there's so many people making money off of that money.
And boats are expensive to maintain a boat.
Oh yeah, I've heard all the jokes about boats.
you gotta keep those media buys coming.
Well, Worcester is the largest city the second largest city, I think, in the country, not on a navigable waterway. So I never had that problem. We literally cemented over the Blackstone Canal, but that's another matter for another time. So we should be paying attention to Cori Bush trying to marshal some forces against this. Is there another person that AIPAC or their affiliates have decided to target, or do they feel like if they can take out Bush and Bowman, they've sent the message?
I think if they could, in their fever dream, take Ilhan Omar out, they would be delighted at that. They shied away from her last time because they thought they had no shot. Then they were frustrated when like, oh wait, we almost beat her. Like, and there was no we, because they didn't really get involved. There were some fringe pro-Israel groups, but AIPAC itself didn't get involved. So that's the wild card, I think, is whether or not they're so flush and so confident that they go for Omar too.
When is that? When is her? I guess she's.
That's usually August or late August, September.
August. Oh, really? That's late for.
I remember it's always late. When is the Minnesota primary? Yeah.
August 13th, I guess. So that's around the same time as Cori Bush. So they're going to be spending.
Those are tough because those are low turnout. It's August. No, people aren't paying attention. That can play in either.
That can cut both ways, right?
Yeah, it can.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.